You submitted the paper. Now you wait. But for how long? What's actually happening? When does a normal wait become a red flag? Most researchers have no map for the submission process, and the cost of not having one is measured in months, sometimes years. This video gives you the full timeline, what happens at every stage after you hit submit, how long each stage typically takes, how to find a journal's published turnaround data before you submit, and how to follow up without damaging the relationship. Hi, I'm Dr. Jessica Deal, academic writing coach and published researcher. Today, I'm talking about the full submission to publication timeline with realistic timeframes at every stage, where to find a journal's turnaround data before you submit. Most researchers skip this. The expensive rejection, which is the 12-month scenario that costs you a year. Green flags versus red flags at each stage of the review process. How and when to follow up with an editorial office with a template. The pipeline model, how to stop treating the wait as dead time. And I'm going to give you a submission tracker template that you can build in 10 minutes. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough in academic publishing. Writing gets talked about, the structure, the argument, the peer review process, the rejection, all of that gets talked about. But what about the time? How long does it actually take to get a paper from submission to publication? What's happening during those months of silence? When is a wait normal and when is something wrong? When should you follow up and how? Early in my career, I didn't think carefully about any of this. I submitted papers and waited. I assumed the process was opaque by design and that asking questions was somehow inappropriate. I had one paper sit in a journal backlog for 2 years between acceptance and publication. That paper was 3 years old by the time anyone could cite it. That's not unusual. It's just not talked about. This video is the map I wish I'd had, a realistic breakdown of what happens at each stage of the submission process, how long each stage typically takes, when to act, when to wait, and how to stop losing years to a process you can actually track. So what happens after you submit? Let's walk through the process. First, there's acknowledgement. The journal system logs your submission, assigns it to an editor. This can take anywhere from a few hours to weeks, depending on the journal's infrastructure. If you haven't heard anything in 2 weeks, it's reasonable to check. Then, the desk decision. This is the editor deciding whether your paper will go out to reviewers. Does it fit the scope? Does it meet basic quality thresholds? Is the argument legible enough to send out? This can happen in a day or take 6 weeks at a busy journal. A desk rejection here is typically fast and relatively painless. It tells you about journal fit, not about paper quality. Then, reviewer assignment. The editor has to find 2 or 3 people willing to review your paper in your specific subfield who don't have conflicts of interest, who will actually respond. This is harder than it sounds and often takes longer than people expect. Then the peer review itself. Reviewers are typically given 4 to 8 weeks, but they may need extensions and journals vary in how aggressively they follow up. 4 weeks is optimistic. 16 weeks is not rare. I currently have a paper out for review at a journal that allows up to 6 months. Then the editorial decision. The editor reads the reviews and decides accept, revise and resubmit, or reject. Another 1 to 4 weeks, or 6 months. If you get an R&R, you have a revision window, typically 4 to 12 weeks, though some journals give you longer or shorter. MDPI journals give you 5 to 10 days. Then you resubmit. Then there may be another round of review, and maybe a third, and then hopefully a final decision. And if accepted, the queue. Proofreading, typesetting, online first publication, then print issue. This can be 2 weeks at a fast open access journal or 1 to 2 years at a subscription journal with a long backlog. The whole process, start to finish, from first submission to published paper, easily 1 to 3 years. Plan accordingly. Here's something I want you to do before your next submission. Go to the journal's website, find their For Authors page or their About page, or sometimes a dedicated journal metrics section. Many journals now publish their average time to first decision average time from submission to acceptance, and sometimes even acceptance rates. These numbers exist. Most researchers don't look at them. There are also external resources worth knowing. Publins, which is part of the Web of Science, aggregates reviewer data and sometimes services journal turnaround times. SciRev is a database where researchers submit their own experience with journals, turnaround time, editorial responsiveness, whether the review was useful. It's particularly good for smaller journals that don't publish their own metrics. Why does this matter? Because if you're on a fixed-term contract or you're coming up for review, you need publications within a specific window. Submitting to a journal with an 18-month average turnaround is a strategic decision, not just an aspirational one. Knowing the timeline before you submit lets you make that decision deliberately rather than discovering it 6 months in. I want to spend a moment on what I think of as the expensive rejection, because it's the one that catches researchers off guard most often. You submit a paper, 6 months later you receive a request for major revisions. That's good news. The paper wasn't rejected outright. You spend 2 months on a thorough revision, you resubmit. 4 months later, rejected. The revision didn't satisfy the reviewers, or new concerns emerged, or the editor decided the paper wasn't going to get there. You spent 12 months on a paper that's now back at the starting line. And it's not actually at the starting line, it's behind it, because now you need to rewrite the cover letter for a new journal, reformat the references to match a different style guide, possibly reposition the argument for a different audience, and the clock on your contract, your fellowship, your tenure review kept moving the entire time. This is not a worst-case scenario. This is a common one. And the reason it catches people off guard is that we tend to think about rejection as a single event rather than a 12-month process with a cost attached. The timeline tracker I've built out in the lead magnet attached to this video, which you can download from the description, is designed specifically for this. You track every submission, every stage, every outcome. Over time, the pattern becomes visible. You start to see which journals are worth the wait and which ones are burning your calendar. The single question I get most often from researchers in the middle of a submission is this normal? And the honest answer is, well, it depends on the stage in the journal, but there are patterns. Acknowledgement within 2 weeks is standard. This is increasingly in the form of an automatic email upon submission. So if you haven't received it after 3 weeks, a brief, polite email to the editorial office is appropriate. Desk decisions vary a lot. A fast journal might give you one in a few days. A slow one might take 6 to 8 weeks. If it's been more than 8 weeks and you haven't heard anything, check your account online. Many journals now allow you to track your paper, but if that is an option and you haven't heard anything, it's okay to follow up. Peer review is the long stage. 8 to 16 weeks is normal. Some journals are faster, some are slower, and some will send you a message letting you know that the review is taking longer than expected. If you've hit 6 months with no communication and no response to a status query, this is a red flag. The distinction I want to draw here is between a long wait and a long silent wait. Long waits happen. Journals are run by academics who have full-time jobs that are not running the journal. But if you ask for an update and you hear nothing, that tells you something about how the journal operates, which itself is useful information. So, following up with the journal editorial office makes many researchers deeply uncomfortable. I get it. There's a sense that asking is somehow inappropriate, that patience is the correct way to be, that following up might irritate the author. I want to gently push back on that. Editorial offices expect status inquiries. They're part of the process. What they don't respond well to is aggressive or repeated chasing. But a single, polite, specific inquiry after a reasonable wait is entirely appropriate. The template on the slide is about as simple as it needs to be. Your manuscript ID or title, the date you submitted, a brief request for an update, that's it. No lengthy explanation of why you're asking, no apology for taking their time, no extensive context about your situation, short and specific. One follow-up email after an appropriate wait is professional. If you don't hear back within 2 weeks, you can send one more. If you still don't hear back, that tells you something about how the editorial office operates. And you can factor that into your decision about whether to keep waiting or withdraw. Yes, you can withdraw a submission. That's a legitimate option, and it's not burning a bridge. Journals understand that researchers have timelines too. Here's a shift in thinking that changed how I work, and that I see consistently in researchers who publish at a steady pace. The sequential model, where you write a paper, submit it, wait for the outcome, then decide what to do, turns the waiting period into dead time. And given that the waiting period can be 6 months to a year at multiple stages, it's a significant amount of dead time. The pipeline model says overlap deliberately. While one paper is in review, you're in early draft on the next one. While you're revising a paper after an R&R, you're finishing the draft of another. The waiting periods become working periods, just on something different. This doesn't mean writing 3 papers simultaneously from scratch. That's not what I'm describing. It means knowing what's in each stage of your pipeline and treating the wait as a resource, not a gap. For researchers on tenure track or fixed-term contracts, this is especially important. The submission to publication timeline is long enough that if you're waiting for one paper to resolve before starting the next, the math simply doesn't work in your favor. The tracker, which I've included as a downloadable resource, has this as a fillable table. But you can build your own version in a spreadsheet in about 10 minutes. And I'd encourage you to do it now rather than after your next submission. The key is to attach a next action and a deadline to every row. Not just submitted and then blank, but submitted if no acknowledgement by X date, then follow up. Or in revision, resubmit by X date. The tracker only works if it has dates attached to it, because dates are what move things forward. Over time, the log gives you something more than just a status update. It gives you a picture of where your writing time is going, which journals have treated you well, which have been slower or unresponsive, how long your revision cycles are actually taking, and whether your pipeline has gaps. That's strategic information, and it's entirely available to you. It's just not something most researchers sit down and collect. I want to close with some tough love. The academic publishing system is slow. Parts of it are slow by design. Parts of it are slow by neglect. And parts of it are slow because it's run by people who are doing this on top of everything else they're already doing. You cannot speed it up. That's not what this video is about. What you can do is stop being surprised by it. Stop losing months to a wait you didn't know to expect. Stop making reactive decisions. Submitting in a panic, withdrawing without a plan, sitting on a rejection for 6 months because you didn't know what to do with it. The tracker, the timeline knowledge, the pipeline model, none of this is fancy or super complicated. It's not about writing better or thinking more clearly or being more creative. It's about treating your time as the finite resource it is and making sure the system is taking as little of it as possible. Download the journal submission timeline tracker. It's in the description below, and it's free. If you want to talk about what the wait has actually cost you, come find academic writers to share your experience in the watering hole. That's the Publish It community. It's free to join. The link is also below. See you there. So, one last thing. Have you ever had a submission sit in review for longer than you expected? And if so, did you follow up or just keep waiting? Tell us about what happened in the comments below. This video complements Draft It, the essential 10-week workshop, a self-paced tutorial to draft your journal paper from abstract to conclusion. Draft It covers topics including how to structure your journal paper, articulating your core argument, writing and refining your introduction and literature review, basic contents and organization, concluding and finishing. It includes but goes beyond the standard IMRAD content. Remember, IMRAD is the acronym for the standard journal selections that include introduction, methods, results, and discussion. Draft It helps you tackle the 2 most fundamental, essential, critical elements of what elevate a research report into a publishable journal paper: a clearly articulated core argument and the structure that supports your entire paper. So if you're ready to publish it, register for Draft It. Register for the self-paced course and you'll have unlimited access so you can start anytime, now, next month, or next year. Find the link in my bio. Thank you for watching this video. Check out my other videos on publishing your research in a peer-reviewed journal paper. Be sure to subscribe as I upload new content monthly.